Hello everyone, welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. Today we're going to be covering swamps, or actually to be more specific, wetlands, and we're going to be covering four types. We're going to be covering swamps, marshes, bogs, and fens. And we're going to be showing you how to make them with the fantasy world style, where to put them, how to put them together. And we're going to be putting it on this map right here. So if you want to follow along, clone and edit this map, you'll find that link in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find that in the video description. All right, so let's get cracking first. Let's kind of define what a wetland really is. And a wetland is generally a mixture between water and land, hence wetland. So water, land. And it's going to be freshwater, saltwater, or brackish. And if you're not sure what brackish means, brackish is a mix between saltwater and fresh water. And some wetlands are specific to fresh, salt, or brackish, or all of them. So it really just depends. As always, you have to set down some rules or parameters that kind of makes putting together a map easier. And with any map, I always turn the grid on. And that grid, each little cell there is going to represent a certain number of miles. On a world map, it's going to be miles or kilometers, whatever the larger kind of metric that you're using could kind of determine, the scale, so that way you know how big a biome is, how big your land masses are, how long a mountain range is, or how long a road is, or how many days it takes to get to a certain location. So a grid is a must. The next thing that you want to do is you want to throw down some climate zones. And the climate zones is going to be really important because it tells you where your biomes are going to be. So for me, I like to use just regular Earth physics, but you don't have to. It's up to you. Just know that if you decide to make up your own, then you'll have to set down some rules and some parameters so that it will be easier for you to kind of put down the biomes on the map. So it's just easier to have some of these rules, a grid and a climate zone guide. I'm going to go ahead and drop the opacity of it so it doesn't kind of get in the way too much. And first is most wetlands, not all of them, and it's not a rule, but it's a majority of them are going to be within temperate areas. And the reason why is because a temperate zone doesn't have extreme temperatures like extreme heat or extreme cold. It has temperate weather, meaning there's going to be cool air, warm air, and when warm air and cool air coalesce, it creates cloud formation and therefore precipitation or rain. And hey, water's a big requirement, right, for wetlands. So mostly within your temperate zones, but you can find them in the boreal or close to the polar. There can be just about anywhere really, but the majority are in the temperate. So it's not a rule of thumb. Just remember, if you ever feel like I don't know where to put my swamp, my bog, my fen, or whatever, temperate zone is you're good to go there. So the first one I want to talk about is swamps. Okay, and again, a swamp is very diverse and you can find them everywhere. So there are saltwater swamps, freshwater swamps, and there are brackish water swamps. And one of the big kind of things about a swamp is that it's a wooded wetland, meaning there's going to be trees. Okay, and that first one we're going to go ahead and see here is that there are trees right here in this area. And so it's a good start, right? If you have a forest and it's not too far away from the ocean or a lake or a river, then you're probably going to find a swamp not too far away because it's where the major body of water is and it's where the woods are. So if you have a forest and some water, perfect. There's where your swamp is going to be. And I put it, of course, the swamps in more the temperate zone. You'll see the temperate zone right there. So it's within that and it's brackish. I've identified brackish. So a mix between salt and fresh water. So I'm going to go ahead and put together how I put together a swamp. I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything here. Usually what I like to do is I like to use the path tool. See that yellow dotted line? I'm just kind of using the path tool to make the shape of the swamp for a specific reason. So that way, if I don't like the shape, I can redo it. Instead of having to reapply the texture 20 times on the canvas. It's just a lot easier just to use the path tool and make it as a little guide. You can also select it and rotate it and move it around so that way you can kind of change the shape as you see fit. So if I go ahead and select it like this, you can rotate it and move it around. That way maybe you still like the shape, you just don't like the rotation that it's at. So you can change it. So let's go ahead and remove these things. We don't need them, and mostly it's already outlined for me because I've got the coastline and I have the mountains and the forest here. When it comes to putting down stamps and textures with putting down a swamp, it's up to you. You can start with stamps first, or you can start with water first, because those are the two requirements, right? Land and water. It's up to you how you like to go about doing it. Sometimes I prefer to throw down my trees first, and sometimes I prefer to throw down my water and then frame it with the trees, or make the frame with the trees and then fill it in with water. We can do both. Let's start with an easier one first. We're going to use these trees right here are going to be perfect. And what I'll do is I'll just make the one thing you want to do is that you want to make sure that it's not like a thick forest where you can't see the ground underneath. How can you tell if it's a wetland if you can't see underneath the trees? So creating little clusters first, just create a bunch of clusters like this. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the mask effects off. This is something that I recommend for you when you start working on a map, is that you turn off those mask effects, because it can cause some lag depending on your machine, and that will kind of speed up. So if you're noticing any lag while you're working on your map, don't forget, turn off those mask effects. You just need to go to the shovel, which is your mask options, and you just click right here, enable mask effects. It's going to be that little caution symbol right there. So you turn them on and off. That will help you free up a little bit, and it won't lag so much. So again, apply down trees and do them in clusters. And what I like to do when I'm making swamps is I make the clusters, and then I'll do little tiny rando trees around it to give it diversity. So usually when I'm working in a space or an area, I like to start with big things first, so that it fills up the space more, so it looks like you're getting more done. If you just do little individual trees here and there, it will feel like it's taking a long time. So don't be afraid to click, hold, drag, and put down those first. After you've done that, then you can go in and kind of fill in single clicks like this. And what I like to do is kind of diffuse the lines of these larger little clusters here, so that way it doesn't look like there's just a little cluster and there's just completely isolated. Throwing in rando little trees here and there really helps. Now, when you're applying, when you decide that you want to put your water down after you finish your trees, you need to think about something. Do you want to paint the water as a texture, or do you want to use the subtract mode of the mask tool? And that really depends on one thing, and that is your mask effects. If you have your mask effects on, it might be that the mask effects might not work well. So let me turn on the mask effects so you can see what they look like. And in this case, mask effects will work, but I'll wait for them to turn on. And then I'm going to take the subtract mode of the mask tool, and we're going to use let's go ahead and use the edgy brush, and we're going to turn the smooth off, and we're going to turn it down to the smallest size. 3, the edginess at 3. I'm going to bring the size down to 0. And what I want to do is just wherever there's land. Now once in a while this might happen, and I'm actually kind of glad it did, because if you ever see this happen, don't panic. All you need to do is go over to your hamburger menu in the top left corner and go recovery. Then start the recovery. Give it a moment and it will fix that, because we've seen a little bit of this in our customer support, and when people run across this, it gets kind of frustrating. They get a little afraid, like, what do I do when this happens? Don't stress, don't panic, just hit that recovery button and it's going to recover that, fix that little mistake that you saw on the screen. So don't panic, okay? And this sometimes just generally occurs when you have mask effects on. So one way to kind of get around that happening, if it does, is to turn your mask effects off. And it's going to take a few moments for the recovery to happen, considering that I'm recording. But while we're doing that, we can kind of talk a little bit more about when we're texturing or putting in the water parts. Remember, I had mentioned that you can, 1, use the mask tool, or 2, use the texture or using a color or whatever you might be. And depending on whether it's fresh water or salt water, will kind of determine what texture you're using. And if you want it to be the same as the ocean, so if it's a brackish or salt water, you might want to use the subtract mode of the mask tool and make sure to use the small settings, whether it's edgy brush or a circular brush. First time chatter. No, we don't know when. I actually don't know when Room Tool 2.0 or Path Tool 2.0 is going to be released. Sorry, I can't give you that information. Hey, Nimrod, great to see ya. So we're just going to give us a moment to recover. And thanks for being patient with me on that. Once it's recovered, we'll turn off the mask tool or the mask effects so that we can kind of avoid that issue just in case it does happen again. And then we'll go ahead and apply that small edgy brush. And like I was saying, you're going to fill in water or the subtract mode wherever there's land and not trees, because what happens is that those trees have roots, and those roots are going to collect generally what's called peat or dirt. Peat is like a composted or a kind of a composite of dead matter that kind of comes together and creates what's called peat. And you find a lot of peat in fens and bogs, and you can find them in marshes as well. But those roots keep a lot of dirt together. That's why you don't want to put water underneath the tree, because the tree would technically have roots, and that would kind of allow the dirt to stay together. That's how you get dirt to stay together, is the roots of trees, rocks, harder materials, things like that. So as soon as the recovery is done, you're going to find that little square that we created. That's going to go away, and then we'll be able to get back to it. And it just takes a moment because we are streaming. And for those of you who are waiting, we are doing swamps. If you just walked in, we are working on swamps, and we kind of just did a little troubleshoot issue here when land disappears when you're using the mask tool. It's just to use that recovery tool. It will probably take much shorter for you because you won't be streaming, and it probably won't take as much time. But for someone who's streaming, it's obviously going to take a moment. So bear with me here on that. We're almost there, 97%. Okay, thanks for waiting here. Can't wait to get that fixed. There we go. Now, when I remove this, you'll see that it's been fixed. Now I'm going to go and turn the mask effects off, so I hopefully won't encounter that again. And you're going to go in, like I said, and only cover where there's no trees, right? So look carefully here. Notice that there's no trees in the water. They're just on the land part. So that's how you use the subtract mode of the mask tool. But you can obviously use textures as well, and that's up to you. So let me go and put this over here, and then we'll try texturing. It's really up to you what style you like best and whether or not it's going to be fresh or salt water. Let's go ahead and just choose a texture. I'm going to use this same blue color right here, and I'm going to bring the opacity down just a little bit. We're going to bring the brush size down so that we make sure we don't accidentally bleed underneath the trees. And you just take a couple clicks and just go in like this, and you can use whatever texture you want. You can use a green. Let's say it's a poisonous swamp. You can make it purplish, some eerie green color. It's up to you, really, because some swamps, bogs, marshes, whatever, will be poisonous, and you kind of want to show that to your players. And so throwing in some odd color or some weird creepy mist or purple mist is a great little thing that you can add in there. There you go. So now I've added it in that way, and this way you kind of avoid using the mask effects as well. You can use whatever texture that you want, browns, greens, purples, blues, whatever it is you want, it will work out great. So this technically right here is a brackish one, but it could also be freshwater. The further away it is from the ocean, then obviously it's not intermingling with salt water. So swamps, not too hard to make. Just remember the kind of the trick. They're in the temperate zone, 1. 2, they're next to a forest, and so they'll have trees themselves, and you can use the same types of trees that you did for the forest, or you can switch them out and use like a swamp tree. And whenever you're working on a map, it's always good to favorite, and a favorite is you just click this little tiny save to favorites right here. And right here I have this swamp tree, and instead you could throw the swamp trees in periodically with the forest. And then what I like to do is fade out those darker green ones and then just only swamp trees the further you get away from the forest, because the tree changes a little bit. So it's up to you how you want to go about doing it, but whatever stamp that you choose, just remember clusters and then single clicks to diffuse the larger patches. So really that's how you put together a swamp. No matter where you put it, you always want to put down either stamps first or texture first. If you put down the texture first, frame what are called vernal pools or pools. Make sure that you frame the pools with the stamp. And if you're going to put down the stamps first, then make sure you create the clusters first and then put the water in the negative space. So really, that's how simple a swamp is. They're not complex. Just remember they're going to be wooded, unlike a marsh, which is not wooded, which we're going to move into next, by the way. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Now you kind of know how that works. How much time we got here? 15 minutes. Let's go ahead and move into the next one, shall we? Okay, let's go ahead and remove the swamp. Let's go ahead and move into a marsh. Now, one thing we should mention about marshes is that they are generally on the edges of lakes or streams. They have very little trees. Mostly it's going to be bushes and grasses and peat. There's not going to be a lot of trees, and very little, if anything at all, right? And much like a swamp, you can find them with brackish, fresh, or salt waters. That's up to you. And with a marsh with no trees, so let's quickly go about how I would go about doing that. Because there's no trees, you're probably going to want to focus on maybe just pools. And I'll put down the stamps I like to use. This is, if you type in swamp in the stamp catalog, you'll find these little vernal pools. You'll also find some vegetation. And of course, you can also use bushes as well. And I love to use bushes. These work out great. And you can change the color of these to anything that you want, okay? Hey, first time chatter. Ripple effects. You know what? If you have ripple effects in your mask effects, I totally recommend that you don't use the subtract tool when you are making your rivers, lakes, or your swamps. And the reason why is because that ripple effects look really weird in small spaces. Those ripple effects only look really nice when on the outside of the continent where it goes into the ocean. Otherwise, yeah. But if you're not showing rivers, swamps, and lakes on your map, it's okay to just have the ripples on. So again, don't use ripples if you're going to have lakes and rivers and stuff like that, okay? It's just kind of a way that I kind of see it. So again, with the marsh, there's no trees. So what you can do is use these kind of watery stamps right here. This way you don't have to use a texture if you don't want to. And just place them around the water, because remember, it's a marsh or a wetland is in between land and water. So in between the main part of the land and the water, you're going to place these pools right here. That's kind of the best place to place the pools is here. And you can change the hue of the stamps if you want to change it. I'm not going to do that because a lot of people might not want to mess around too much with that. And then of course, I totally recommend that you scale some down a little bit so that you have a mix between large and small pools. Remember the rule, and I say this in all my streams, is that if you're going to have a large something, add a smaller something, and then another small, make it even smaller. And what that does is it kind of creates the diversity that you see in nature, right? Not everything is the exact same size. Trees vary in size and height, so it's okay to bring the scale down and up when you're adding trees, pools, whatever it might be, right? And of course, if you want, you can throw in bushes if you like. If you don't like that color, let's say that's too green, you know, there's a lot of different bush stamps that you can use. You can just type this in here, go to the catalog, type in bush, and you'll get a lot of different options. Maybe this browner one would look better, so maybe I'll just go ahead and put this on a layer above it. And one of the big tricks that I can recommend is to overlap. Have a bush covering a pool. Have a bush covering some of the river. Okay? And what that does is it creates this sense of depth, right? Because overlap. You have a stamp overlapping another stamp, overlapping a texture, overlapping a lake, a river. That overlap is what creates depth. So remember that. And as always, once you've thrown down the larger bushes, scale it down a little bit and throw in some smaller variation, right? And then at the very end, furthest away from the water, go ahead and just throw in some of this grass right here, just to kind of fill in the rest of the space. There you go. Right, there you go. Now you have a swamp. And one thing you can do is to take that same water texture and bring the opacity way down. Okay, and then just go ahead and lightly go over some sections with whatever texture, water texture or grass texture that you want to use, just to show that there's some more water, right? That it's got a lot of water. This is a freshwater one. Freshwater marsh. Remember, no trees. So show the vernal pools, show some bushes, show some grass or peat, but don't show trees in your marshes. Okay, that's super important. Don't show trees. All right, well, that is it for a marsh. And there's a lot of different ways that you go about doing it, but this is just one. And I try to follow a method as I go about doing it. So that way it's easier. It's so easy to get discouraged when you're working on a map because you're not following a method or a process. The process helps you to stay focused and it helps you to get things moving quickly because it is so dang easy to get discouraged when you're working on a map because things just aren't turning out exactly the way you envisioned it. That's okay. It never does. And sometimes it turns out better when you take the time and work on a process. Okay. All right, and that's a really great question, but I totally recommend you go over, by the way, God's Gift to Maths over to our Discord, and I can answer that question there because we are running short on time for this stream. So we just finished Marshes. Great, awesome. We're probably going to go ahead and work on the next one. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. You saw how to put it together. Not hard. The next one is to throw down a fen. Okay, if you're not sure what a fen is a kind of a freshwater, whether it's rain or groundwater. So it's not going to be brackish and it's not going to be near the ocean with salt water. It's a fresh water only. And it's mostly made up, its vegetation is made up of peat. Remember, that's that decaying land or decaying biomatter. Okay, so no trees in a fen. It's going to be, well, it can have some trees. According to Wikipedia, it's about 25% trees. So if you want, you can throw in 1 or 2 or even 3 rando trees in the fen to make it look like it's got low woodedness, right? So like a marsh, pretty much no trees, if any at all, maybe just a couple, right? And remember, it is going to be in a temperate or boreal zone. So it's going to be in the northern hemisphere. It's going to be in your temperate. Notice here the fen is located up here. It's near your boreal and near your temperate areas. They generally like it a little bit cooler, okay? A fen and a bog can obviously be called a mire as well. I'm sure you've heard the term a quagmire. And for a fen, it's about the same thing as a marsh, really. You can use those water stamps, or you can use some bushes. It's not too complex. Really, it's just as easy as the marsh, but just remember, it's fresh water only. That makes it very different from marshes and swamps, where they can be a mix between fresh salt and brackish. So fresh water only. So it's not hard to figure out. You're not going to put it next to the ocean. They generally can be found again in your temperate and boreal zones. Let's go ahead and put it together. We're going to do a different approach than we did last time. What we'll do is we'll throw down the pools first with water, and we'll do something different. We'll use a green texture because I don't want to keep using the same texture. So let's use this one. And what I'll do is I'll just paint the whole section that I want with that green texture that I want. So this is where that fen's going to be. And there's that first. And then I'm going to want to put down some bushes. And way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to use the luminosity blend mode. I'm going to do things a little bit differently here. What luminosity blend mode does is it picks up the texture underneath it. And when I place it down, you'll notice it's going to pick up that color. See, when I put it over here, it turns brown. When I put it on here, it turns blue. So I'm allowing it to pick up whatever texture. I'm going to drop the contrast down and bring the brightness up. And what I want to do is create this illusion that it's a little bit more blended in. And now that those settings have been set, I can now place a bunch. So remember, place big first, once you place the bigger ones, scale them down. Put down a couple medium-sized ones. Also just put a couple rando out somewhere. And it's always best to cluster them. Then once you've done that, bring them down another scale and get some itty-bitty ones in here. In fact, we can bring them up just a little bit more. There we go. Like this. And remember, it's always best to do them in clusters. They look really nice when you put them in clusters like that. There we go. Once you've done that, don't use the subtract mode of the mask tool because you don't want them to be the same color as the ocean. So use a texture instead. That'd be my suggestion. And what's really cool is we'll use this same texture right here. And we're going to go into advanced settings. And I'm just going to make it a little bit, maybe a little bit darker to create depth. So one way that you create depth is through contrast. When something is darker, it's deeper. When something is lighter, it's higher up. And the reason why that would be is because the higher something is, the more exposed to light it is. So it's going to be brighter, right? And when something is down lower, there might be things obscuring the light getting to it, right? So make it a little bit darker. So what I'll do is I'll go to color in the advanced settings, and I'm going to bring the brightness down a little bit. Okay? And then what I'll do is I'll fill in the negative space with this darker texture to make sure that it pops out. So let me just apply this here, and you'll see it's a little bit darker. And I'm just going to put them in patches. Remember, wherever the negative space is. And the darker it is, the deeper it is. So I'm just trying to kind of create this illusion of depth here with pools by just using the same texture and changing the brightness of it. That's it. That's as simple as it is. So now I have my little fen there, okay? And remember, it's freshwater, not saltwater. So luminosity, or should I just say blend modes, are your allies. They're useful for all kinds of things, especially luminosity, because it picks up the texture beneath it. So there's your fen, okay? Okay, now there are some other things. I wouldn't mind going in and looking up swamp and press enter. I'm gonna go click the Inkarnate tab. Now, if you have Pro, when you click that Inkarnate tag, it's gonna look for swamp textures in every single style. And it's okay to bleed outside of styles. It's just hard to do. You should just be very mindful when using textures from a different style. Matching stamps and textures from different styles can have some really varying results. So it's super important to be sure to be careful when you apply them. Okay, now I'm going to use this swamp texture, and it's an alpha, so you'll notice that you can't see it very well. That's okay. Don't worry about it. We're going to put it down. And I'm going to just apply some of it to the ground here, just to kind of see what it looks like. And you can see little striations and lines. You'll have to go over it a couple times, but let's just go over it a couple times. And what I'm doing is I'm going to use this texture to kind of create this illusion of pools. Now, this is in the parchment style, so if you're having a hard time finding it, it's okay. It's in the parchment style, or just click Inkarnate tab, and it will go through all styles. Remember, you need to have the Pro subscription for that to work. And you'll see that there's a little bit of dark line work in here that kind of creates more of the vernal pools, right? And you can change the hue of this to different. So there you have your fen there. All right, so that last one, we're running short on time. Let's do that last one, and it's going to be a bog. And just like a fen, it is in the northern hemisphere, generally in your temperate and boreal areas. They are also freshwater. They get most of their water from rain, though they can be found near lakes. And the most common place to find them is in a dried out lake basin. And I'll show you how to go about maybe looking at that. Let me go try to find the bog here. Let's go ahead and turn that on. There's your bog right there. Okay, so remember, fresh water, and they're generally found, not always, lots of different locations, but a dried up lake basin is a great start. And the way that I show a lake basin is just like I did here, right? I used the contrast of a texture, just made it darker to show depth. So a dried up lake basin is probably going to have a little bit of depth to it. So that's perfect. So let's go ahead and take a brownish texture, and we're just going to apply it right on top. And we're going to use that to create this illusion of depth. Perfect. Now we have that little part right there, and it looks like a lake basin. And we'll go ahead and remove that. You don't need it anymore. So there's your bog. That's your, or it's a good start. And then from there, we're going to want to put down some stamps, right? And you can do a lot of different things when it comes to doing a bog, but it's very similar to a fen, really, not too complex. I'm going to go back to fantasy world. I don't want to deviate too far away. Okay, here you go. And not much trees in a bog, just like a fen and a marsh. Very little trees, if any at all. And what you can do is put down these kind of brownish. Remember, I used these brownish texture or brownish stamp right here. And I'm just going to place them. And remember, place big first, right? Place your big ones first. Then drop the medium size. You start to see a pattern, right? I have a method. I start doing the same things over and over again. And that is how I'm able to get maps done quickly, is by having that method or having a process, okay? Then we'll make them the smallest ones. There you go, perfect, right? And you see the pattern with it, right? It's because it's just so similar to a fen or a marsh, it's not too hard to put together, right? And of course, if you want, you can use that same texture that we used here, but maybe we don't want it to be brown. Maybe we want to use a different size. Let me bring the scale down. Let me bring the color down to black instead of brown. Okay, and then let me fill in the negative spaces. Remember, that's the trick. Let's go ahead and fill in this negative space here. There you go. Nice. And for those of you who have a little more time, you can obviously fill in those spaces, fill in that line work with a texture as well. And I'll show you how to go about doing that as well. So you'll see that there are some pools there. Then you can just take whatever texture you want. We'll bring the opacity down a little bit and bring the scale, the size down quite a bit, because we're filling in these little tiny spaces. And then you just go in like this and just fill in where the pools are. That's just filling within the line work. That's it. Wherever the line work is, just fill that in with pools. And if that's too bright, you can make it darker. It's up to you, right? And just fill in, again, where the line work is. All right, that's it. And I just want you to know that I am using a pen. Here, I'll go ahead and paint without using a pen. Just use a mouse, just to show that it's totally doable. You don't need a pen, but a pen makes it easier, obviously. But most people don't have a pen. So I'll make sure to kind of use a mouse here. And then there you go, right? And you can use whatever texture you want. Maybe I want it to be a poisonous fen, right? Or bog. Then I can go into color and just change it to a purplish color. Maybe let's go with, let's see here. Let's go through the color. There we go, purple, perfect. And we're going to bring the opacity down. And I'm just going to go in like this and just throw in a little bit of purple right here. There we go. Just to kind of show that, hey, it's poisonous. It's poisonous. I can even grab these right here. Cool pro tip here. Select one stamp. Hamburger menu. Select all stamps from this set. And I can go into U and change it. So if I want to make them green, I want to make them this bluish color. I want to make them purple. Okay, whatever color I want to make them. There you go. What about that one? I kind of like that color right there. That looks nice. And then bring the saturation down. It's a little too bright. There you go. Now you have a purple bog. And it's poisonous, right? So being creative. Don't be afraid. Explore. Do all this stuff. That's how much fun it is. So just when you're putting things together, just remember to follow those methods and you got it together. It's a cotton candy swamp. Cotton candy bog. Eat that cotton candy, throw up, and have some dangerous poops. All right. Hey, folks, that's it. We're running out of time. That's it, really. So it's not complex on where to find them. Biggest rules are they're going to be in the temperate areas. That's where you find the majority of them, especially swamps. Most of wetlands, you're going to need, it's usually an interim area between water and land. That's why it's called wetland. You need water and land. There's freshwater, saltwater, and brackish. For those of you who didn't catch what brackish means, brackish is a mix between salt and fresh water. And some are going to be forested, which are swamps, and some are not going to be forested, like a marsh, a bog, and a fen, right? So not complex, so easy to put together. So that's it for this stream. In the next stream, we're going to be covering lakes next week. Unfortunately, we're not going to be covering mountain lakes because there's no way you could fit a mountain lake to scale on this map. But I'll be showing you how different lakes, how they form, where they form, how to put them together, and how to show headwaters going from a mountain to a lake and then going out to the ocean, okay? All right. Hey, thanks, everybody. Thanks for following along. Appreciate it. Don't forget to go ahead and join our Discord, and you can always reach out to me or a mentor on our Discord server if you need any help working on anything. Always glad to help out our community. Thank you, everybody. Love y'all. Please stay safe and healthy, and merry map making.